30 seconds, okay. Okay, hi everybody. My name is Seth Hardy, and I'm going to be talking about online communities and the politics of DDoS. That's distributed denial of service attacks for anybody who's questioning it. So, my name is Seth, and I seem to have become a DDoS magnet. The reason for this is because I'm involved in a number of online communities. The biggest one is Oculi.net, which right now has more than 80 users. It's a shell server, IRC server, hosts a number of services for people, email, web space, and unfortunately, this seems to have got me a lot of attention all the way from kiddies who want to DDoS me to the FBI. So I get to deal with a lot of this stuff on a day-to-day basis, and I figured I would share the lessons I've learned and the mistakes I've made with you guys. So if anybody here is interested in working on a similar online community, you don't do the things that I did wrong, and you have a much better way of going about doing it from the beginning. So last year I talked about building communities in self-destructive environments. Not that the hacker scene has any self-destructive environments. It has nothing to do with it at all. So this is sort of a continuation on that theme about people who try to destroy the infrastructure that is there, provided there for them for free. And that's what I'm doing. I don't charge any money. I don't have any requirements for donations or anything like that for the service. It's free. And as a result, a lot of people just don't think it's bad to attack it. I'm not quite sure why. But I have some theories, and I'm going to talk about them. So we're going to do this in about 3 parts. First is the problem, what denial of service attacks are, and the social aspects of them, as well as the technical. The second part is on countermeasures. We're going to cover the technical methods of countering DDoSes, and then the other methods. You'll see what this means in a little bit. And the third part is about the blame game. Unfortunately, one of the big problems with denial of service attacks, and this is why I'm giving the talk in the first place, is that there is a mentality among people who are DDoSed that the victim is the person to blame. So I'm going to cover a little about this and tell you how to try to break that and what to do if you are ever the victim of a DDoS attack and you have your ISP telling you that it's your fault because you made it happen. At any point, if anybody has any questions, please raise your hand or just yell at me or shout at me or something like that. So I guess we will start. Starting with the problem. Here's a quick summary of the problem. The internet is serious business. Everybody takes it very seriously when they shouldn't, and a lot of people feel the need to exert power over others. There's always that guy that just wants to ruin it for everyone, whether it's because he feels a sense of empowerment from doing it or because he's not part of the special club. And this always exists, whether it's an online community or an offline community. It's always there, and unfortunately on online communities it's harder to deal with because there's such factors as anonymity involved. DDoS attacks generally aren't worth it for somebody doing it themselves because it's usually eye for an eye. Any packets that you have going out generally is the same as the packets coming in unless you're using some sort of reflector. But a lot of times that's not even necessary anymore. So it's eye for an eye, same that going out is the same coming in, but the advantage that the DDoSers have is they're not using their own connection. They're using a botnet. And so I will describe the botnet stuff in a little bit. And the other main problem with DDoS attacks right now is that it's very easy to build a large botnet. Microsoft vulnerabilities in particular, you don't need any technical skills if you want to build a botnet of thousands of bots that will launch a denial of service attack at any IP of your choice at any time. All you have to do is download a script, run the script, wait a week or two, and you can get literally thousands of bots at your command that you can send off at whatever targets you'd like. And because access to this weaponry is so easy for anybody, even if they have absolutely no technical skills whatsoever, this is going to be a very common problem, and stopping it from the side of the attacker is not going to work. So unfortunately, we're put on the defensive, and the attacks have to be stopped on the side of the defender, which is a lot harder. So I'll talk about that later on as well. Online communities as public spaces, there's a very clear comparison between meetings in person and online communities. From anywhere from how people participate to how the group self-polices. Groups in person generally tend to self-police very well. If you look at Notacon, for example, the organizers of the con have people working a security detail. If there's a problem with one of the attendees, the security detail has the authority to have them removed from the con or the hotel. If you are breaking the law in real life, police have the authority to stop you, detain you, and put you in jail if you are doing something that is against the rules. On online communities, this is a little harder to deal with, and especially in hacker circles, where a lot of people who are involved in the hacker community are outcasts from their own larger community, and you're always the geek or the nerd or whatever, and as a result, the hacker community seems to be a lot more accepting than other communities. And while this is a great thing to get everybody involved and everybody participating, it makes it harder to identify problems and have them removed. There are a number of situations where, how many people went to the Hackerspaces talk? Okay, so they talked a lot about a number of these hackerspaces. One of the hackerspaces was the Hacker Halfway House, and I was one of the original participants in it. One of the problems that we had is that everybody was welcome, and even if somebody was causing trouble, it was very hard to come up with a way that was agreed upon by everybody how to punish or enforce punishment on somebody who's breaking the rules. It seems to be very common 2600 meetings, for example, where a lot of behavior that is generally considered antisocial, people can get away with it. And on one hand, that's great because it makes the community a lot more open. But on the other hand, it's harder to police the community against people who are only there to disrupt. It's one thing if somebody just doesn't have the greatest social skills and says things that's inappropriate. It's another thing if somebody is actively trying to disrupt the community. And that line isn't very clear, and even when it is, people hesitate. From what I've seen, both online and off in my experiences, people hesitate to actually make that distinction and enforce a sort of punishment. And again, this is worse on the internet because it's a great decentralized mess. There are no rules that necessarily need to be applied to or enforced at any particular site. So just because you are going to a certain shell server on the internet, there might be a rule saying no launching denial of service attacks against people. It's completely unenforceable. So the rules don't always apply, and people who choose to ignore the rules have a lot more leeway than people who choose to ignore the rules in real life. And this leads to the empowerment of a lot of people who say they're bullied in real life or just generally want to show some sort of power over others. There's no way to stop this. There really isn't. And as a result, again, the defender has to deal with the problem. And I'm not the only person who's noticed this. This is from Penny Arcade. It's true. Does anybody here deny that? Okay. It sucks. It's terrible. But unfortunately, this is the way it is. So, and this is how it's done. Generally, the way a botnet will work is that somebody will set up a scanner that goes from IP to IP, trying to find machines that are vulnerable, usually a Windows vulnerability, and it will compromise that machine, and it will bring that machine onto IRC on a particular control channel. And then they can go into that channel on the IRC server and they just have to type in one command, and all of the different zombies, the infected machines, will immediately start to launch an attack against your target. So it's just remote control software that you can get tens, hundreds, or even thousands of machines at once. It's very effective, and I'm one of the administrators for 2600net, the 2600 IRC network. We've had to stop these channels on a number of occasions because they were using our network as a way of launching their attacks or controlling their attacks. So it works, unfortunately, and given the way IRC is set up, there's not really much we can do about it. You just have to keep a vigilant eye on your servers, and if you see one of these control channels, you can shut down the entire botnet, at least temporarily, by closing down the channel. But because it's distributed, there is no simple way of stopping one of these attacks. Yes?
How do you generally recognize a control channel?
The question was, how do you generally recognize a control channel? And the answer to that is bot names are usually automatically generated. Usually it's either random letters or numbers. So it's very easy to identify a channel that is filled with bots if you do a listing of all the channels on the server and you see a channel with maybe 1,000 users in it and your server only has 400 people normally. Or if you see a channel with even 50 people, but those people are all randomly generated nicks of the exact same format. It just sort of indicates that there's not a person behind it. The other way you can do is you can actually go into a suspicious channel and see who's doing what in there. None of the bots will ever talk unless they're reporting status messages. So that's a good way to identify them. And if you see somebody saying attack IP, then it's also pretty clear that this is a botnet. So that's how you can generally identify them. They don't really hide their existence much except for setting the mode of the channel +S, which is secret, so that it doesn't show up on a listing. But if you're an administrator of the network and you're poking around, you can always find these things. And here's what a few of the common DDoS attacks look like. The first is a simple ping flood. This is just a ping to a machine and the echo response back. This is a lot worse when you have thousands or millions of these happening per second and it's using up all your bandwidth. Another attack is a SYN flood. This uses the TCP three-way handshake. It'll send out the SYN packet, and it's just a normal SYN packet. You will see this packet in any normal, legitimate TCP connection. And the server will send back a SYN ACK, and the attacker will just leave it open. And what this does is it will use up all of your available connections, keeping them in this half-open state where it's waiting for the third part of the handshake to come through. And it will eventually time out, but what this means is that you can block legitimate users from accessing the machine because there are no more available connections. If you're sending out 1 million connections per second and you only have, say, 100, then it's very unlikely that anybody who's trying to make a legitimate connection is going to get through. So if you want to identify a SYN flood, you just look for a whole lot of SYN packets and no ACKs following up on the SYN ACK. Another common attack is the Smurf or Fraggle attack, which is either ICMP or UDP echo replies. What this is an attacker will send out to multicast addresses a packet asking for a response and forge the from address, the IP address in it, so that all of these machines will then try to respond to this IP address that happens to be the victim. And if somebody has their network misconfigured, this attack can be used as an amplifier. So you have a small number of packets going out and a whole lot coming back against the attacker, and it's not coming from you. So it's a good way of both hiding who you are if the network is misconfigured, as well as doing an amplification attack. And it's good to know what these look like, especially in TCP dump or Ethereal or another network analyzer, because if you're being attacked and you want to figure out what's going on, the best way to do it is to load up a packet capture of what your line is seeing, and this is how you identify what it is, whether it's an actual network outage or whether you're under attack. So That's it on what DDoSes are and how they work. Are there any questions so far? Nope? Okay. Well, I guess I will talk on countermeasures then. So the first countermeasure is black holing or null routing. It's quick, it's easy, it's effective. You just send all of the packets going to a certain destination to the equivalent of dev null. You just drop them. You don't look at them, you don't process them, you don't try to find out any information about them, you just get rid of them. And it's quick and easy, but the problem is it cuts off your connectivity. Anything coming in, if your machine is entirely black holed, then no traffic will get to it, whether it's attack traffic or legitimate traffic. And this is usually the first line of defense, the oh crap, what do we do line of defense, which is usually followed up with you can change your IP address, move your machine to a different address on the internet, and maybe the attack will stop. And unfortunately, it almost never does. As soon as the attacker notices that your DNS has changed, they will just change the IP that they're going after, and you get hit again, and your ISP really doesn't like you. Routers can also be used to block attack packets. You can use the access control lists on them to drop any matching traffic coming through as opposed to routing it. This is generally how the black holing is done. It's hard to tell legitimate traffic from attack traffic if the attack is good. If it's a SYN flood, you can usually pick it up. If it's an ICMP flood, you can usually pick it up. But if somebody is launching a denial of service attack against your web server by repeatedly getting random pages that they've found on your site before, there's no way of being able to tell if it's coming from a randomized address what is legitimate and what is not. So this is another method that is used as an emergency line of defense. You use it when you have no other options and you need to do something and figure out what is going on and try to come up with a better solution. You can also use firewalls for this. Same problems as black holing with routers. It's hard to distinguish attack traffic from legitimate traffic. And especially in the case of DDoSes such as SYN floods, the moment you have a ton of small packets moving through a firewall, your firewall performance is going to go to hell. It sucks. They can't deal with small packets very well at all. And if the firewall is a single point of failure, then you're kind of screwed, because if your firewall fails, everything behind it is unreachable. So a denial of service attack against your server that's behind a firewall will also function as a denial of service attack on the firewall itself. And if that happens, you get cut off, and there's not much you can do about it. IPSs, intrusion prevention systems, they're basically useless against denial of service attacks. If you've got a tap and you're watching it with an IPS, the IPS will definitely notice that it's a denial of service attack. What can it do? Generally not much. One of the main things that they can do is update ACLs on routers, but we've already covered that. It just doesn't work very well. They make managers feel better, but they really don't do anything useful against stopping one of these attacks. They might be able to page you and tell you what's going on, but they can't stop it. What's supposed to stop it are DDoS mitigation devices, which are essentially firewalls that are tuned to be able to take DDoS attacks and stop them. And they're designed to handle high bandwidth, lots of packets, and if there's an emergency failover, they will generally fail open, which means if the device completely dies, then packets will still be able to get bridged through the device and it won't get cut off from the network, or everything behind it won't get cut off from the network. And the bad thing about these devices, you might think, hey, these are made exactly for this purpose, this is great. They are completely and totally useless unless they're further upstream from you. So if the incoming pipe to your data center is this big, and then the pipe to your machine is this big, and you're getting this much attack traffic, then if it's blocked past the data center on your side, it's going to overflow your pipe. If it's blocked at the data center, it's not going to overflow theirs. So these are really meant to be used in data centers by ISPs or by backbone providers, and they're not always there, they're not always working, and the ones that do exist don't necessarily work very well. So if you want to go out and spend $50,000, $100,000 on a DDoS mitigation device thinking it's going to completely protect you, make sure you have an idea of how much bandwidth you have versus how much bandwidth a DDoSer can get you with. I've been hit with over 60 megabits before, which might not sound like, compared to the DDoS attacks in the news, like against Amazon or eBay or whoever, 60 megabits might not be that much, but it's still a lot of traffic. And it's, especially if you've got a 2.5 megabit line at a colo, it's not going to help you on your side. So that's one thing to consider before putting down a whole lot of money on these devices. Contacting your ISP. It's what you're supposed to do. It's supposed to be effective. They're the business that handles this sort of stuff. Supposedly they have people with a level of technical competence that can identify and put an end to these attacks. And I'm not going to name any names of any particular companies, no names, but there are a number of companies that I've had dealings with that haven't been very helpful or friendly. And even if you're paying a good amount of money, for example, I pay what's considered very cheap, $100 a month for a colo facility right now, a server co-located, just a little 1U machine, $100. That's nothing. And as a result, they don't really care. So your ISP might not be helpful at all, might not even forgive you for being DDoSed. The best that they will generally do, unless you are a customer that is paying a lot of money, you are one of their larger customers, and they don't want to lose you, they'll offer to null route your IP, give you a new IP, and say, basically, if this happens again, we're going to have to talk. This has happened to me on a number of different ISPs, which, again, I am not going to mention. The first thing that I was always told was that all they could do, because of technical limitations on their side, is black hole traffic going to me, and that's not useful. So this option might not be the best one. The best one, I really hate saying this, but threatening to break somebody's fingers is a very good deterrent. The last time I was hit by a DDoS attack, it was because there was one user on my system that was on IRC and pissed somebody off, and this guy decided to DDoS 3 major servers, mine and 2 others. And as a result, some of the admins of one of the other servers got his buddies and came up with a short list of people who might be responsible for the DDoS attack, visited person number 1, and he had no idea what was going on, and he was like, I don't know. They went to visit person number 2. Person number 2 fled. He knew what was going on, and he got the hell out of there fast. So it was pretty obvious that he was responsible, and fortunately the DDoS attack stopped. I really don't like this, but it's an illustration of the fact that this is not a technical problem, unfortunately. It's a social problem, and you have to come up with some sort of way to deal with these people that is not reliant on the technology whatsoever. And again, I really don't advocate violence. Don't do it. Especially don't blame it on me. But what? Disclaimer. Yeah, disclaimer. Yeah, don't do it. But unfortunately, it seems to be the most effective way of stopping these attacks. So, speaking of that guy that fled, hopefully he's learned his lesson. If anybody wants to give him a call right now, it just reminds him that DDoSing isn't good. And again, social problem, social solution. Somebody acts out of line, there needs to be some sort of self-policing in the group. And whereas most people don't want to do it, some people do. This might be considered, oh, that's horrible. You're dropping somebody's docs, you're showing off. Why are you doing that? This guy's not going to do it again. That's all there is to it. I hope he's learned his lesson, and it's really sad that he had to do it in the first place. But, what can you do? Okay, so the basic response process to a DDoS, the first thing you need to do is identify that an attack is happening. Generally, you do this by noticing that all of a sudden your net connection's not working, or you can't get to your server, or something's wrong. It's pretty obvious. The best way of identifying what's happening is looking at a traffic capture. And if your traffic capture shows what is obviously attack traffic, or shows that you're getting too many packets and your network analyzer can't show it, it's a pretty good indication that you're being DDoSed. There were a lot of times where, when I was living at the Hacker Halfway House and we were getting DDoSed, the moment the network went down, we would immediately run to a computer and go into defensive mode. And sometimes it was just a network outage, and we were like, okay, this is all right. We'll just wait a little bit. It'll come back. It's cool. And sometimes when we noticed attack traffic coming in, we were immediately on the phone with as many ISPs as possible. And the first one is always your own. You contact your upstream provider, and you ask for temporary black holing or some other solution that they can provide that they volunteer. The main thing you need to do is block the attack at the ISP as opposed to hitting the last mile pipe to your house. Because if the attack makes it that far, even if you've got DSL or cable that's 5 or 7 megabits, with the number of zombies that you can get on the internet by these automated scan and infect programs, that's pretty trivial. And upload is generally limited, especially compared to download speed, but this doesn't matter if you have 10 or 50 or 100 or 1,000 bots. It really doesn't. You will always have less bandwidth than the attacker. So you need your ISP to do something about it, and you need to get somebody at the ISP that actually knows what's going on. One of the ISPs, the one that I currently have at home, Comcast, cable modem, completely and totally useless. I've called their tech support when I've been getting DDoSed, and they had no idea what the hell I was talking about. And they told me first to reboot my computer, and then go to the control panel, click on network properties, do you have an IP address assigned? And it's obvious that they're reading from a script and they have no idea what's going on. And the moment I say, hi, I work in computer security for a living, I know what I'm talking about, can you transfer me to somebody who knows what they're talking about? They usually just hang up on you. They don't like it, and I still don't know a good way of getting to talk to somebody at Comcast that has any sort of clue what the hell they're talking about. Go back to the violence. No. I don't know what to do. And at other ISPs, before when I was on Speakeasy, they were better about it. My colo that I'm at now, they're good about it. It really comes down to picking an ISP that can demonstrate that they have a clue of what they're talking about and that they're willing to talk to you. And the only way to do this really is through trial and error. And it sucks, again, but if you figure out ISPs that are useful with their tech support, that will be a lot more valuable than the extra $5 or $10 or $20 a month that it costs to get that ISP. Yes?
Trial and error, ask a bunch of your buddies, similar things. Hopefully someone else has found a good way.
Yeah, exactly. Ask around, DSL report and the like often tell you about the quality of somebody's tech support and whether they are actually useful or not, but a lot of it is trial and error, and I've done a lot of the trial and a lot of the error, unfortunately. So once you've got in touch with your ISP and they've indicated that they are willing to work with you, you need to provide them with logs, and it also helps to start contacting the providers of the attackers yourself. And if there's any way that you can get an automated script that will run through, do an IP lookup, find out who is responsible for that IP, and fire off an email with a log of the attack, you're good. Unfortunately, this doesn't work so well, even if it is automated, and a lot of ISPs just don't care. If Comcast gets an email saying, hi, one of your cable modem users appears to have an infected machine that is being used as a DDoS zombie, what's Comcast going to do? Nothing.
Well, actually, I had a machine compromise, unfortunately, and they actually cut off my connection. And
They did?
About 48, 72 hours. Yeah, what happened is
Wow, okay.
I had to do some testing, so I opened up my port, and somebody went in there and compromised it. I hadn't tested it. So, but they compromised it, and within like 12 hours of them throwing up a bot on my machine, they cut off my connection for 48 hours with security.
Wow, okay.
Yeah,
So I guess they're learning or something.
Who was your ISP? I was really surprised. It was a Sunday night. It was literally 12 hours from when the person compromised my machine that I had cut off. A month ago.
Huh, okay.
So
That's
the
good to know.
machine that I had thrown up that I was just doing some testing on, somebody compromised it, and I was surprised that within 12 hours they had cut off my internet connection.
Okay.
Generally, whenever I'm getting DOS, it's from China. So what do
Yeah.
you do in situations like that?
Nothing. You send out an email and hope the best and expect nothing, unfortunately. And that's a problem with the internet being decentralized, is that a lot of people who should be responsible for taking care of these problems just don't give a shit, and there's nothing you can do about it. Hey.
Most of your cable providers now have acceptable use config files that they'll force down to the cable modem when the IDSs pick up the additional traffic.
Okay.
Because they are using MRTG to trend all the gigabit interfaces out of the routers, and they will notice a pickup at pace or port.
I totally believe you that this exists.
Well, you go to
but-
cable labs, there's a lot of specifications that are being forced down on them for the next level of DOCSIS. So,
Okay, cool. I totally believe you, and that's awesome, and I'm glad to know that. But being somebody who's been on the receiving side, if it works in 50% of the cases, that's still a lot of attack traffic. If it works in 25% of the cases, it's still a lot of attack traffic. So it's awesome that they're finally starting to make progress on this issue, but I'm going against this as the point of somebody who's been hit, and it doesn't matter to me because I still get taken offline, and that's unfortunate, but that's just how it is. Anybody else? Okay. Other responses to a DDoS attack, generally it is not done to shut somebody down completely. It's meant to take all of your primary servers and everything offline, but except for when it's done by motivation of profit, like the people are hired to DDoS competitors' companies and take down their web servers so one company can do better. This has been in the news a few times where somebody will get together a botnet and sell out the botnet services so that somebody can have their competitor DDoSed. Usually if it's not for money, and by usually I mean every single time from what I've seen, when it's not for money, the person wants to be able to brag that they're fucking you over. And they always want to be able to let you get on. Hopefully, they hope you get through a neighbor's wireless or something like that. But when you find them, and it usually doesn't take much to find them, they make it very well known that they're doing it, especially if this is through IRC. So there are a number of ways to use this to your advantage. First, you find somebody on IRC that's bragging about how hard they're hitting you. This happened to us once at the Hacker Halfway House, and one of my roommates said, we've worked with the FBI before to get people who do DDoS attacks put in prison. If you don't believe me, here is a file that provides the FBI report of what happened last time around. And the file was on his own web server. And 5 seconds later, there was an access to this web server for that file by a residential account somewhere in California. Oops. That's one way that this person was tracked down, and we were able to find out who he was. And when we called him on it, saying that we had his personal information, he stopped. So didn't even need to threaten violence. But when we said, hey, we know your IP, we know who you are, we've found out some information about you, and we can find you if we need to, he dropped it. And you need to come up with new and interesting ways of catching them like this because of the anonymity, and especially with compromising machines and using them as proxies and being completely anonymous, you need to have some other way of tricking them into finding their identity. And usually if you find their identity, it then goes over to the real world situation of, oh shit, I'm actually responsible for my actions. And at that point, people generally back off. And this is how you can persuade the attacker to stop. You can either ask nicely and say, hey, I'm sorry. And you know, saying you're sorry, even if you don't mean it, works really well on a lot of people because they just want to feel better about themselves. And if you say, you know, I was an asshole, I'm sorry, can you please stop? And they stop, then you win because the best you can do is break even, and that's your win situation. And then
Basically just an enabler at that point?
yes, but if you're looking at trying to maintain your own site, then unfortunately there's nothing else you can do. And hopefully then somebody else will be the person that finally decides to use the finger breaking approach. And you know, hopefully they just threaten it, but it's a social problem, not a technological problem. And if you want to talk about the whole, you know, if you submit to the bully, does the bully get more aggressive? I'm not an expert in that area, and I just know what works for, oh crap, I'm getting 60 megabits of attack traffic, I need it to stop right now so that I can report this guy. So it might not be the best way, but it works.
How about the FBI that you were mentioning? I think the threat of a pound me in the ass federal penitentiary would certainly also make people stop.
Yes. They have said that if anybody ever DDoSes me, they would consider a DDoS attack also an attack on infrastructure. And they have asked me very politely if I would be willing to give up logs of any DDoS attacks that happen in the future. And while I'm very protective about my users and I'm very, very much about privacy and not giving up any info, if they want to go against a DDoSer, they're more than welcome to. Not my problem. So yeah, that's unfortunately, though, in most cases, the FBI will not look into anything like that unless there is a large amount of monetary loss from a large company. And unless it's doing at least $10,000 in reported damage, chances are they're not going to even bat an eye at it. Against a person who's spending $100 a month on a colo, they don't care. Anybody else? Okay. And the last option is to just wait. And it sucks because you don't know how long you're going to have to wait for. But most people who do these sort of attacks know that if their botnet is in consistent use, they will get noticed. And they just want to do it to prove a point. So they might hit you for 5 minutes now and 30 minutes later and 30 minutes an hour after that. But at some point, they will find somebody else that has pissed them off, and they will turn their botnet against somebody else. And this is the worst option. And it's an option that I've had to deal with at least twice, but it works. Eventually, somebody will lose interest, and the DDoS attack will not be permanent. So, last part, blame game. Who's at fault for a DDoS attack? And this is the part that's hit me the hardest out of all of this. So I called my ISP when my service was down and said, hey guys, what's up? And they said, we got no idea. Okay, I'll let them figure it out. Get a call back, and they said, you're being hit by a distributed denial of service attack. What did you do? And I said, excuse me? And I said, well, you're being hit with a DDoS. Did you piss somebody off? Were you on IRC? I'm like, why does that matter? What's up? Like, why are you asking me about this as if I'm the person who is to blame for this attack? And then they noticed that I had an IRC server running on my machine, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the IRC server that I was being attacked over. And they immediately decided that it was my fault. And I was paying them a good amount of money for colo services. And they basically said, we'll change your IP this time. We will black hole all attack traffic going to your IP. You can set up your machine on another IP and hope the attacker doesn't change it. But if it happens again, your service is being terminated. And the last time this happened, I had just drank a bottle and a half of wine because I was in a really shitty mood and gone to bed. And then 5 minutes later, I got the call saying, so we're going to shut you off. And I don't really remember a lot of what I said, but I definitely did question their competence as an ISP and a colo facility if they can't black hole port 80 coming from a certain address block and have other traffic to other customers in the ISP service be okay. And when I started questioning their competency, they left me alone, and they really should be able to take care of it. But it's easier to blame the victim, especially if you're on IRC. If you're on IRC, you've done something wrong. That's all it comes down to. There is a stigma attached to IRC that is not associated with any other instant messaging service. And a lot of that comes from the fact that your host address is visible in IRC, so if somebody wants to attack you directly, they can do it. If you're using AIM, if you're using Yahoo or MSN, and you try to do the option for a direct connect, say to send a file, it will pop up with a screen saying, you're about to give up your IP to the address of somebody who might be a hacker. Are you sure you want to do this? And the reason for that is because people on the internet are assholes, DDoSing is easy, and that's not a good combination. So if you're doing something on IRC, you've obviously done something wrong, you've pissed somebody else off, and it's your fault. And why is it your fault? Because if you've got a $30 a month cable modem contract, it's more cost effective for them to kill your account, lose you as a customer, and if you say, I'll never do business with you again, they're like, okay, whatever. It's more cost effective for them to get rid of you. And if you're paying twice that, $60 a month for DSL, it's still more profitable for them to boot you. Because if they're getting downtime to other customers, they will lose more customers, and the moment they've lost 2 customers, it's no longer cost effective. And I don't know the actual numbers that they use to calculate these things, but I definitely have had multiple ISPs tell me this bluntly. It is more cost effective that we drop you than to deal with the problem.
Just a quick little bit of math.
Oh, wait, hold on.
Just a quick bit of math. $30 or $60 a month versus $30 or $60 for a few hours of text time.
Yeah. Okay. And the colo that I pay $100 a month for, I figured that they would be more than happy to take care of the problem, and I was wrong. Because it was happening at 2 a.m., the colo, which as far as I know is run by 2 people, even though they present themselves as a large colo facility, they're just renting out rack space in a data center. The DDoS attack at 2 a.m. meant that James had to wake up, go to the data center, and deal with the problem himself at 2 a.m. And he wasn't very happy with that. And that wasn't worth $100 a month to him, apparently. So, cost effective or sleep effective? Yeah, I don't know. But so that's why the victim is generally blamed. And here's a portion from their acceptable use policy from my colo facility that I'm paying $100 a month for, specifically so that I can run servers, specifically a shell server. And at the bottom it says, if a user's IRC servers or participating clients in an IRC network are frequently compromised or attract denial of service or distributed denial of service attacks that disrupt or deny service to other customers or users, the colo, which I edited out here because I don't want to name any names, may null route, filter, suspend, or terminate that customer's service. So they say right away in their ISP, if you go on IRC and you get DDoSed, we can cut you off. And I don't think this is right. I found this out after the fact. I did read through the AUP when I first signed on, but I must have said, oh yeah, that's whatever, it's not going to happen, it's not a big deal, and just forgot about it. So this is how they were able to tell me that when I got DDoSed and they noticed that port 6667 was open, that it was my fault and that they were going to cut me off. So read your AUPs very, very carefully and know what your rights are.
Can you be DDoSed by something else, like being on AIM or something like that?
If you do something like a direct connect, then they can get your IP. If somebody is hosting a web forum and you post something that they don't like, then they're running it. They can find your IP that way. There are other ways other than IRC, but IRC makes it easy. That's all. Anything else? Anybody? I'm sorry?
CI host,
CI host?
is that the Colo?
No. It was not to Wardex based out of Boston. Nope. So on the flip side, let's take a look at some of the recent attacks against me. First, it was a hostile takeover of an IRC server. And then it was another IRC server. And then it was a shell server that people IRC from over and over and over again. So on one hand, this policy might be bullshit. That's ridiculous, blaming the victim, not okay. But on the other hand, unfortunately, there's not much you can do about it, and it does happen because of IRC. And if you're put in the situation of having to defend it, it gets very hard. And in my case, my IRC server that I run has a total of about 20 users, who most of which know each other in person, and it's not attracting any DDoS stuff at all. But when it comes down to you can get shut off for being for being on IRC as a client and getting DDoSed, then what next? Web pages, forums, whatever. It sucks, but unfortunately, IRC does perpetuate this problem. So what do you do? And the first thing you need to do is break this blame the victim mentality. It's not okay, and you will completely get screwed if you take whatever they say blindly. So what you have to do is make it sure that you're not to blame for being the target of the attack, even if you are using IRC. It's not your fault. It's not your fault that somebody else decided to be a stupid asshole and DDoS you. And if you know what the technical solution to your problem is, request it precisely. Don't ask for them to do something about it. Say very specifically, for example, when I was getting attacked, I said, please null route all traffic from this IP block, which is where the attack traffic is coming from, to this IP on this port. And they said, okay. And rather than losing complete connectivity, I lost web access from AT&T. And that was it, because I knew what to ask for. And know the terms of your contract and service agreement. If you know what your rights are, then you have a much greater bargaining point, and you won't fall into the same trap as me, where I didn't realize that I can get terminated for being an IRC client. Know what your rights are. So to summarize, normal person plus anonymity plus audience equals total fuckwad. Penny Arcade noticed this and put it very eloquently, better than I can summarize. The technical solutions don't work because not enough people are scanning for these denial of service attacks. The technical solutions won't work, and you have to block it on the attacker, the defending side, which basically means you can't do anything about it. And if you try to get in touch with your ISP, they hate you because you're not worth it. So there's no simple way of how to do this. And unfortunately, this is a social problem, and I hate saying this, but threatening to kick somebody's ass works significantly better than buying a $100,000 DDoS mitigation device and putting it in a colo and hoping that it does what it says it will do. So a new solution needs to be come up with, and we're stuck in this point where it's not there yet, and the attackers are still winning. That's it. Any questions?
Anonymous IRC possible?
Is anonymous IRC possible? Yes.
So would this be a partial solution to the problem?
It would be a partial solution, but there are still other tricks that you can do, like this web trick of downloading a file, or tricking somebody into doing a direct connect on AIM or something like that. You shouldn't blame the technology that gives up the info. Like it's
something that makes it harder.
It makes it harder, but it's not a solution. Anybody else? All right, well, thank you for your time. block a complete range of ports that can be used for legitimate use. It really doesn't.